Now, we're going to get into this presentation. So as I mentioned, we're looking at authority and affection, and I've kind of tried to symbolize it as, two pieces of the same puzzle. It's not one before the other, and it's definitely not one and not the other. Now, you might have heard that phrase, don't smile until Christmas. Basically, go in hard from September, be really kind of, rigid, be strict, be firm. But to me, that's all authority, and it doesn't work because you have to build a relationship with children. You have to connect with them, and they have to like you. Otherwise, it's much harder for them to follow your rules and listen to you, and also just enjoy being in your class. And if they don't enjoy being there, then obviously it affects their behaviour, right? If you go to work and you don't like it, you're just not going there in a great mood. You're not going to do as much work. You're not going to work as hard, and that's going to be the same with them. So what I would say is don't waver until Christmas. Okay, just be very clear with your boundaries, your consequences, but at the same time, you're spending that time getting to know them, showing your personality, connecting with them by shared interests. So find out what they like, see if it's similar to you. Maybe you're into sports that the children like, gaming. So always using those things to kind of connect and have conversations and use humour. But the authority comes in by really being firm and clear with your boundaries as well. So we'll get a bit into that a bit more. So literally the definitions, and this one, people won't like this one for primary schools or for any schools, but authority, the dictionary definition, is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. Now, I didn't tweak that at all, even though it sounds quite strong, because that is your position as the teacher. That is your position in the classroom. You have the power and the right to give orders, okay? Now, obviously, that's within reason, but the orders you're going to give are not going to be unreasonable. You should have the power or the right to say to a child, sit down, start your work, put that away, and you should be the one making the decisions. And you should, to some extent, enforce that obedience. Otherwise, it's a classroom of chaos, isn't it? And it's actually not a safe place if you're not enforcing certain levels of obedience. If you weren't making sure the children obeyed, for example, don't run around the classroom, or don't run with scissors, don't get up and run to the door when it's lunchtime, then you wouldn't have a safe classroom. So you do have to be authoritative, and all the way to this definition, I'm not even going to tweak it. But like I said, it's joined the whole time with affection, which is defined as a gentle feeling of fondness or liking. So you won't like all the children, that's the truth. Some of them will annoy you. Some of them, you'll clash with them personality-wise, but you will have to act and present in a way that you're fond of them and you like them and you enjoy having them in your classroom. And even by acting that way, it will help you respond to behaviour differently, saying, you know what, let me try and be, gentle in my approach. Let me treat them with kindness, but also I'm not going to waver on what my authority says. And so just to kind of clarify how this comes across, because it might sound worse than it is, some kind of phrases and quotes that summarize it are rules work best in relationships. So we want both sides. Structure without connection leads to resistance. Connection without structure leads to chaos. And it's true, isn't it? If you're just authoritative, some children will resist that and they'll rebel against that. But if you're just connecting and you're just a friendly, fun teacher, there'll be those children that can't actually have that lack of boundaries. That will lead them to chaos. And then being in charge and being kind are not opposites, they're partners. A bit like the old phrase, you have to be cruel to be kind. I don't really like it because you don't have to be cruel. But to be kind, you do have to be firm, you do have to be clear. And in that way, you're kind to the class because everyone's safe, everyone knows where the boundaries are, everyone enjoys coming to school and not sort of being like, well, this is unpredictable and that child does this and that child next to me is like that. So all of these things join together to be authoritative and affectionate at the same time. So essentially, you want this to be over everything. So when you're thinking about a behaviour policy, this would be for leadership, what your own classroom system is, what happens in the playground, hallway transitions, assembly expectations, they're all under that. So it has to be authoritative. Okay, how are we going to transition to the hallway? Well, we're going to do it in silence. I'm not saying you have to do that, but just as an example, how are we going to ensure silence? Well, if you can't do this in silence, we'll try it again in your playtime, things like that. But also affectionate, so that you explain to them the reason we do this, and it's kind and it's warm, and it's look, guys, I don't want us to waste time. I don't want us to be missing out on learning. I don't want to have some of you practicing this at playtime. I want you to get out and have your playtime. You should have it, and it's kind of positive. So whatever it is, you're keeping it under that heading. Okay, so a general system under this, which most schools will have, and I'll look at this more in detail in another video, but generally is going to be that children begin somewhere green. It could be a smiley face, it could just be a kind of a traffic light system where it's just colours. It could be yellow and red cards, but they start on, it's green, it's good to be green, and systems like that. They start there, everyone starts there, it's good choices, it's correct behaviour. Before you get up to a yellow face or a yellow card, a yellow position, whatever it is, there's normally a verbal warning. So a child calls out and you give that verbal warning. And if it happens again, those poor choices, they're now in a yellow zone. They move their name, they move their little picture, or they go and put their yellow card on their name, whatever the system is. And that's kind of the first stage. And then if they persist, you warn them again before the red, usually. I mean, some people might go, look, you've had your warning and you're on a yellow, I'm not giving you another warning. But I'd usually say again, look, you've already got onto a yellow, let's not get onto red, let's just sort it out. But if they repeat those poor choices, then they'll move to that red. Or if there was a more serious behaviour, like hitting or swearing, they wouldn't go from warning yellow, they would just be able to be given a red card, red face straight away. And everything there, they would have to be told. And if it's a school system, they should know it. If it's you sort of trialling it in your classroom, make it as clear as possible for them. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about expected behaviour, because in some schools, the reward system, and they might have dojos, they might have positive points, whatever it is. In some schools, those would be given out as a kind of reward, what I would call a tangible reward, because it's actually something, it's points, it's, points you can use towards some other reward. It's the person with the most points gets to choosing time, or golden time if you have that. They reward what I would call expected behaviours. Now the problem with that is you reduce the behaviour standard in your classroom. You say that standard kind of doing the wrong thing is in the middle. And when you go to just a normal expected behaviour, like put your pencil down when I've asked you to, or stop talking, or line up, or go and sit at your tables, which is expected behaviour, right? That's nothing special. If you sort of say, right, everyone line up, and then it's like, okay, house point Timmy, house point James, then you're saying to them standard expected behaviour is rewardable, and you're bringing down the behaviour standard in your classroom. That should be standard behaviour. In fact, it's so standard that if you don't do it, you're already in the below expected zone. You're now getting a warning. So if I'm saying everybody put their pencils down, and James and Lisa's pencils are in their hands, I'm like, James and Lisa, this is your warning. Why are your pencils not down? So that's the level, and you keep that level high by not rewarding expected behaviours. And rewarded behaviours would be much higher. Like if someone's always doing the right thing, sort of 5 times in a class, every single time you've said put your pencil down, they do it. Every time you say go and line up, something like that, every single time, then you can then give that tangible reward. Abdul, every single time I've asked the class to put your pencils down, you're ready. You can have a house point, you can have a dojo. So repeated expected behaviours, or something just above the norm, helping another child you didn't even ask them to, doing something, someone spills something, they pick it up, spills a pot of pencils, doing things you just didn't even ask them to, can be rewarded with those points, whatever your system is, marbles in a jar that lead to a reward. And so again, that raises the behaviour expectation, because it's actually rewards are only for things that I didn't even ask for, I didn't even expect, and you've gone above. And then it also helps you to know when to sort of start giving out your warnings and your consequences, because it's anything that's below the expected. So like I said, if you're not following any of those expected behaviors the first time, if I've given you an absolutely basic instruction and you haven't done it, you're already down here. Okay, if it's sort of like when you get to your desks, I want you to open your books and start writing the title, the learning objective. That's expected, right? If some children go into their tables and they're playing with pencils, they haven't opened their book yet, straight away it's like, James, Daniel, Lisa, none of your books are open. This is your first warning. When I look around in a minute, I want your books to be open. I want you to have started your work, because you're already in this zone. And you can start talking about consequences if you have to speak to them more than once about any of them. So I just wanted to go through expected behavior versus below expected. Okay, last thing, and this is important, because this is where you can really shine. This is where you can really control your classroom. Essentially, you can dictate what you want in your classroom, because once you have a system like that, you tell your children what your expected behaviors are. You tell them what is rewarded and what is consequenced based on what you want. And one of the best things I ever chose for one of this is that I told them I really don't like having to say things twice. Now, I'm not talking about explaining a concept. I'm not talking about teaching. Of course, I'm going to have to explain it more than once. Of course, I'm going to teach the maths, make sure everybody understands, and then 5 children still don't understand. No worries, I'm going to come and help you. But where I've given an instruction to do something, like some of the things I mentioned before, those expected behaviors, I don't want to have to say that twice. And I make that super clear to them. I'm saying that's the type of thing that's going to annoy me. I'll say it that plainly. You don't have to be as plain as that, but you can tell them this is something that would be a warning. This is something that will be, first warning and then consequence. And you control that. You dictate what you want that to be in your classroom. If you don't like them getting out of their chair without asking, say, this is something I'm not going to tolerate. This is something we're not going to have in the classroom. You're just going to end up missing your playtimes and stuff. So just don't do it. And like I said, choose what you want. You don't want children to come up to you when you're at your desk. They need to stay at their desk and raise their hand. Tell them that. And every single time they go against that thing that you've said you don't want, you implement that warning and that consequence. And after a while, they will be molded and they will be trained. And you want to be really quite firm with that and really rigid. And don't loosen it, don't compromise. And what's going to happen, I hope, and this is what happened for me, and I was talking to a friend recently and he was saying, I don't have to be that rigid. And I was saying, that's because you did it early on. And now your classroom's really controlled and really contained. And if at some points a child calls out and you don't jump on it, you're not going to get chaos. It's going to be a one-off. You can get them straight back. Whereas if in that beginning stage you aren't rigid, they're going to be all over the place, and clawing them back is much harder than just setting it up the way you want it from the beginning. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're in the middle of term, even in the middle of a week. It could be a Wednesday when you watch this. Go in tomorrow and set it up. It doesn't matter. And that's the best thing about kind of behavior management with young people, is that you can go in and say, look, this is something that hasn't been going well. We need to work on it. You're not going to say to them, I haven't been good at this, or I haven't been firm enough on this. Just say, this is something we haven't been doing well enough in this class. We've been getting out of our desk. We've been calling out without putting our hand up. We've been talking when it's been silent work, whatever it is. And so you dictate what you want and don't waver on it. However, like I said, if you've been doing this for 3 months, there'll be times where you're a bit looser and you don't jump on everything, and you're not like, right, warning, now consequence. You're not so black and white. But don't even think about loosening it until you feel completely in control, which, if this is kind of you're not there at the moment and you know you're not there, that will be minimum a few months down the line. So don't even have any kind of relaxing or loosening in your mind until you've set up what you want. And the last thing I'll say about that is just to repeat these things regularly. So it might be that it just starts to slip a little bit, nip it in the bud. If you start to see that thing that you didn't want to happen start to happen a little bit, don't wait for it to become the norm in the class and now it's quite a lot. Right when it happens early on, stop the whole class, say, look, I've said I really don't like this thing, calling out, whatever it is, getting out of your chair. It's starting to happen again. And I need us to sort it out. Okay, I don't want to start having people in at playtime again. and so on. And also advertise the positive as well and say, look, I'm going to be throwing out reward points. I'm going to be, giving some sort of reward to those who are, absolutely smashing it with this, and just always use both of those kind of positives and the negatives to enforce what you want when it starts to slip. All right, that's everything for this video. I'll see you in the next one.